Hi, my name is Rictor Riolo, and I have a master's degree in science and education. For my independent study in graduate school, I produced 7 podcast episodes featuring professionals in the public education system. Surprisingly, it included a bonus interview with a parent who wished to be included, who wanted to be heard. Like with education, this podcast was at the mercy of current news, current events. And as I was interviewing people, breaking news affected my questions.
This is CNN Breaking News.
President Trump now on his way to fulfilling another campaign promise by gutting the Department of Education. And this week, a big number of employees at the DOE were shown the door. The battle over federal involvement in local education is one that's been decades in the making.
As we covered at the top of last night's show, Harvard University is the first university in the United States to just flatly and publicly refuse to capitulate to the Trump administration's blitzkrieg against academia.
We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs. Your state is going to control your children's education. We're going to move education into the states. Let the states run the schools.
Well, apparently that doesn't apply across the board.
For example, in April of this year, 2025, federal judges in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and New Hampshire pushed back on the Donald Trump regime and Project 2025's attempts to shutter the Department of Education. And as these wins occurred, they were addressed, as were the government-sanctioned attacks on diversity.
President Donald Trump is giving schools and universities 2 weeks to eliminate diversity initiatives or risk the loss of federal funding after an education department memo on Friday telling them to stop using, quote, racial preferences as a factor in admissions, financial aid, hiring, or other areas. Schools must now end any practice that treats students or workers differently because of their race, or they will lose eligibility for federal money. The demand calls for an end to personal essays and applications and forbids dorms and graduation events for only certain races.
I will eliminate all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the entire federal government.
The following boundaries were set in place for these podcasts and agreed upon by each guest. Every speaker used an alias, a name, to protect themselves from any retribution or online harassment. No opinions were expressed by me, the interviewer, at all during the interview. And a few times, I unfortunately sound a little robotic. I kind of come off a little unsympathetic with my questions, but it's because I was trying not to influence my guests' points of view. It was a struggle, but I succeeded. And no real photos or videos of my guests were used. Instead, it's all AI-generated imagery. The questions I asked range from by giving back power to the states and how they handle public education, what positives or negatives do you foresee? What are your concerns or thoughts regarding the attempted shuttering of the Department of Education? I even asked every single participant if they considered themselves to be DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what kind of support do teachers and students need most right now? Some questions were modified for the specific field or relationship each guest had with their students. There were more questions, but those mentioned were core and central for each podcast. So for this first episode, Dr. Gina Rogers joins me. She's an immigrant from Romania and was the first teacher that I interviewed. She is an English language development teacher, ELD, at a middle school where I was teaching at earlier this year. There were a few things I found surprising in our conversation. The discussion became emotional, which I was not prepared for. I ignorantly failed to see that the topics can be triggering, primarily anti-DEI initiatives which are affecting people. I walked away from this interview deeply moved by Dr. Rogers' reaction to my questions and her authenticity. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Red Pens and Red Flags, the podcast that's not afraid to grade the current state of American education. I'm Rictor Riolo, a grad student knee-deep in the world of teaching, technology, and just trying to stay out of detention. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Gina Rogers.
Hi, Rictor.
Thanks for joining the podcast.
Nice to be here.
Before we jump in, can you tell us a little bit what you do right now in education? Is it public, higher ed? What is it?
Yes, I am a public education middle school teacher. I teach students from 6th grade to 8th grade, and specifically, I am the teacher for the newcomer program that is housed at this middle school. Those students are refugees or immigrants from all the countries. The requirement for them to get in the program is that this is their first experience in school in the U.S. And so I am their greeter, so to say, and I am charged with teaching them conversational English and also just teaching them about how school works in America versus, the country that they're from.
You use the term newcomer. That's pretty much self-explanatory, literally newcomer. How long are they in the newcomer program before they're immersed into English language development classes?
Well, that depends on how fast they become proficient. And when I say proficient, I mean, are they conversational? Can they talk about their needs? Can they navigate the school environment? Can they do the academic work? Which, again, that's really tricky because I have students who have had very little school. I have a student that had like 1 year of schooling, and he came here in 6th grade. And then I have students that have just, have had a lot of experience with school. And so I'm going to learn a language at a different rate than you're going to learn a language. There's no two students that will learn at the same rate. Officially on our program description, it says 6 to 12 months. At high school, they shelter the students a little more. They are able to stay in the newcomer program for 3 years because that's the definition of recent arriver. That's another label that students from other countries get in the school system.
English language development, ELD, as it said here in Oregon, state mandated. There's testing that's involved, ELPA, English Language Proficiency Assessment, and the funds come from the state for student resources for these new students that are coming in, requiring aides, translators, etc.
Yes.
Would you say these students are at risk with the current climate in the United States, with what's happening with the Department of Education being attempted to be dismantled by the president?
I can certainly say that there are unknowns, which would mean that there is an opportunity for them to be at risk. So there are many unknowns, right? We don't know what is going to transpire and what the new laws are going to be. I can tell you that they're very stressed and that the students are very stressed, especially after the election. I had a lot of fights in my classroom. It was really hard to get them to work. There was an emotional response to the election because they did not know what their future would hold.
And now with deportations happening with ICE, you mentioned earlier some of these children are refugees. Wow.
So yes, it really stinks because my students don't know if they're going to live in the same housing day to day. They don't know if they're going to have the same job. They don't know if they're going to be able to go to the same school. There are so many unknowns for my students, and I'm realizing what a privilege it is to know that you're going to get to wake up in the same bed for the unforeseeable future, whereas my students don't get that privilege. They don't know, it's all up in the air.
Like you said, a lot of what ifs. You mentioned you had some fights.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, how do you, as an educator and a person of our community, how do you respond when students or parents bring up politically charged topics?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that's really, really important to my classroom and what I try to keep at the forefront of my mind at all times is safety. My classroom has to be a safe place. And so the students were not fighting about politics. They were fighting about, pushing, and they were fighting about the soccer ball. They're not debating politics and getting riled up and, talking about that. It's almost secondary, right? It's just raising the level of stress, and then it comes out in odd ways, right? Because it just brought up the level. So they weren't fighting about I think you're going to get deported and you're saying that I'm not going to get deported. They weren't fighting about those. Those were not the topics. The topics were just secondary. So it just raised the stress level. So when they do, there are some students that do say, I have an immigration appointment, and remember, they have very little English right now. So they speak more to the assistant who's Spanish speaking. I have a partners of Spanish speaking students, about 80-20 of my students speak Spanish and 20 other languages. And so they'll share with my Spanish-speaking classroom assistant that, my mom has an immigration appointment tomorrow and we don't know if we're going to come back or not. What do we say to that? We say, oh, you'll be fine. You'll come back. Don't worry about it. No, we can't say that. So we just say, well, we'll hope to see you tomorrow and we wish you a very good outcome from your appointment.
Martir Garcia Lara and his father, Martir Garcia Banegas, are now back in Honduras after being deported from the U.S. just days ago. Now, in a small town, the 9-year-old is trying to get used to his new reality. He says,
I was scared to come here. I wanted to stay with my brother.
They're already stressed out. So saying that bleeping son of a bleep doing this to, it's that's what we want to say. What we want to say is we want to
be transparent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to add to their stress or their grief.
Thank you.
They have enough on their plate already.
Yes.
That's what I'm getting.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep it a very safe environment, and we respond, but you're saying, how do we respond? And what we respond is by just hearing them and maybe asking, do you have any questions about this? Here's what we know. We really try to hear them because everybody wants to be heard and seen.
Right.
But we also don't make it kind of the center of our classroom.
The Trump administration is petitioning the Supreme Court to leave mass layoffs at the Education Department in place. The emergency appeal to the High Court comes just days after the first U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a lower court ruling.
Do you have some concerns regarding the attempted shuttering of the Department of Education if Oregon were to lose funding, for example, from the federal government, and a lot of what ifs, like you had mentioned? As a ELD teacher, what will your future be like in 2 years? Do you have concerns about that?
I definitely have concerns about that. This is really, let's see. So this is really emotional for me because I myself am an immigrant. Sorry, I didn't expect him.
Gina, if you don't mind, where did you come from?
Romania. And I came during a time when the political climate was very welcoming and open. It was during the Carter years. But, my country was in full dictatorship mode at that time. Sorry, I don't know why I'm getting so emotional.
It's very triggering. It's not an easy topic. And I totally understand coming from a situation like that.
My concern is that people are coming here to get away from that. They're coming here for safety, and they're not going to receive safety. And that is very troubling to me. The lengths that my students go to leave their unsafe country And to come to this country is just amazing. And for them to come here and to not be treated well and to not be treated with respect and dignity is really just beyond what I can take. The day-to-day, I'm going to get back to the question. I'm going to try to get back to the question. Yeah, I might not have a job. The, English language development program just might, the title, I can't remember what titles, all the title programs. This is a title. This is Title III. And so all the title programs are in danger of being, shut down. And I hate to look into the future because I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm a person that just kind of lives in the moment and what is. But yeah, the fact that I might not have a job and the fact that there's lots of people. The English language development program, has, I would say probably in our district, I would say the English language department probably has at least 100 employees. I'm guaranteed a job because of the union, but where?
You'd be pushed into another school in another classroom. You might be teaching auto mechanics or something.
Yeah, it's troubling and anxiety producing. I'm experiencing just a fraction, a tiny, tiny drop of what my students are experiencing where it's the unknown, right? I don't know what is coming. And what do we do with that?
A West Ada school teacher is being told to remove 2 signs of inclusion from her middle school classroom because the school district says it violates policy. Sarah Anam has taught world civilization to 6th graders at Lewis and Clark Middle School for the past 4 years. And for the past 4 years, Sarah had these signs up in her classroom. One that said, "Everyone in this room is welcome, important, accepted, respected, encouraged, valued, and equal," written over the colors of the rainbow. And another that said, "Everyone is welcome here," showing hands of various skin tones, hearts in the palm, those kind of things. Pretty benign signs if you look at them. And before we go any further with this, the sign with the rainbow colors, not the same as an LGBTQ flag, although Sarah says she's very much an ally, she just doesn't advertise it in her classroom. So for 4 years, these signs have survived sans harassment. Nobody said a word about them. That is, until about a month ago.
Dr. Rogers, you mentioned that you moved here from Romania in the Carter years. Do you consider yourself DEI?
If you look at me, I pass. I don't look like DEI, but I am DEI. And that is a question that I answered on my application. Do I speak another language? Okay, right? I speak another language. Is that going to be a marker? Is that going to be something that they look at? Right? And, I've been working, with the district for 20 years, so I don't think I stand to be let go. But at the same time, where does it stop? It's a slippery slope, right? Do you speak another language? Do you,
How do you identify?
Yeah, like if you keep going down this path, it's at the eugenics level. I am very worried about that slippery slope, about this is where we're starting, but where is the end point? What's the end goal with doing away with that?
We have 2 questions and we'll be done.
Okay.
What kind of support do teachers and students need most right now at this moment?
Okay, I can talk about the safety.
Which you brought up earlier.
Yeah, I think to know that you are safe and, our basic need, our Maslow need, the hierarchy, right? Our basic need has been threatened with this administration. We don't have the safety anymore. I might lose my job. My students might get deported. We just don't know. We don't know what's happening. And so when our basic needs are not met, we cannot learn. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm trying to do. I need to be productive for my students, and my students need to make progress so that they can have agency and ownership over their life. And basically, it's really sad, but I need to feel safe. I don't feel safe. And so I'm trying to provide that for my students every day. We do have routines. They get the same response from me, whether they've been fighting or not doing their work or whatever emotional or social problems that they might have. They get safety from me. I don't know where I'm going to get my safety, but I'm a grown person, and, I will deal with that as it comes. My students need to know that we're here and that they have a safe classroom, they have a safe place to learn, and whether they, come and go for immigration appointments or, move because of homelessness or whatever, that we are here. And so that's what I think my students need, and I need as well.
What gives you hope in this moment in our country?
Without sounding too ethereal, I think the human spirit let me try to figure out how to say this. I think we all want to be free. We want to have freedom and an agency and independence. And, I think there's the hope that I have is that people are loving, people are going to care for one another, people are going to love their neighbor, and people are going to just be there for one another. And I've seen that in my life. I'm over midlife right now, and I've seen people step up, and I've seen people defend each other and persevere in hard times and support each other. And that is pretty much the only hope I have, is that it's kind of grassroots, like the grassroots movement and the grassroots, what I do in my own little corner of the world is going to ripple and hopefully turn the country towards a better direction than it's going in right now.
Sarah stood her ground and kept the poster in her classroom because, as she says, it's the foundation of public education. Everyone is welcome here. And it's just the right thing to do. Since then, she has had countless people stand up for her. Students protesting on her behalf, celebrities celebrating her courage, her story going around the world. Well, nowhere is the solidarity for Sarah and her message more evident than at a small family-owned T-shirt shop in East Boise.
I am a volunteer.
Doreen Gardner saw Sarah's story too.
It was quite moving and just didn't make any sense to me, and that's not the Idaho I know.
Which is why she felt the need to be part of it.
If this is a small part of what we can do to help and make a change and make things better, I'm all for it.
I do hope that the human spirit and the love for one another and the caring for one another is what is really going to help kind of steer in the right direction. That is a hope that I don't have anything to base that on whatsoever. All I know is, just myself. I know that I'm going to do what needs to be done to help and support my students and my coworkers and my family and on. And I'm hoping that that's the same way. And one of my favorite quotes by, again, is something that talks about this directly. And he said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And that is my hope, is that this generation is going to stand up and speak up, really just not allow our country to go in this really dangerous and negative direction.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rogers, for joining me with this podcast. And that quote is extremely powerful. It's interesting that it came from a president that attempted to dismantle the Department of Education. But as history shows us, the United States Congress stood up to him. And you had mentioned President Carter earlier. Yeah. President Carter is responsible for the Department of Education.
Yeah.
So
President Carter definitely has a soft spot in my family's heart, even though it's, almost, it's going to be 50 years. We're celebrating our 46th year in America.
In 1979, President Jimmy Carter signed into law a new cabinet-level agency called the Department of Education.
The noblest task of government is education.
It emerged out of concerns highlighted during the nation's tumultuous civil rights movements of the 1960s and 70s. The goal, create access to equal educational opportunity for everyone by centralizing information and managing resources, including funding, research, and health care. But the department has long been a target of opposition. Ronald Reagan tried to shut it down. President Trump has denounced it as well.
I looked up the immigration policy at that time because that was actually one of my assignments in school was to look up the immigration policy when you immigrated. And he was soft. He was open to the suffering of others around the world. And he didn't want people to suffer. And he knew that he could offer people safety, just safety. That was really nice. When I came over, it was Romanians, Eastern European, Eastern Blocs, but mostly Romania because Russia couldn't leave. Romania was they kind of put the thumb down on them to allow people. But at that time, it was also Cambodians. And so this was after, so really ugly stuff. And Carter was like, hey, you guys, you're safe here. And we were.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gina Rogers. It has been a pleasure discussing this current state of education in the United States with you.
Thank you for bringing the topic to the forefront. I appreciate your time.
I'll let you get back to grading.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Red Pens and Red Flags. This podcast series samples multiple public education professionals from different roles in schools. This includes teachers, administrators, special education, paraprofessionals, and language specialists.